Just hanging out, huh? I love it.
I took them all down.
Smart woman. Okay. All right, everybody. So Amy just popped the presentation into the chat, and I did start recording. So let's get going. Once again, my name is Caitlin Bott. I am the Southwest Elementary coach, and we have Amy here. She is a secondary coach, but my counterpart was unable to be here today, so she is here helping me out. So we are here to talk about strategy 3, managing and facilitating group work and discussions today. A lot of what we're doing today would be best if you did stay with us. For those of you that have gone through this process with us before in our PLs, we obviously give you some time to do independent work time, which of course is your choice. But we would love to be here to collaborate and work with you all today if that's something that you're interested in. Otherwise, we will get started now.
So going back to the mindset today, we are focusing on self, and throughout this discussion about groups and grouping students, expanding their discussion, we're going to be reflecting on our own cultural lens, beliefs, and biases throughout this presentation. So keep that in mind as something to think about as we're going through this, and we'll also have some time for thinking and reflection.
Okay, so today, just as an overview to think about what we'll be working on today, we will start with talking about the 2 whys behind intentional grouping and the importance of group work. So although those seem very closely related, we really want to hone in on what grouping looks like for to make sure that students are successful, and then explaining why group work is important for students to understand why they're working with one another rather than independently. So after we talk about the 2 whys, we'll move into our 3 strategies, which would be talking about grouping. Specifically, we are going to be referencing Kagan strategies and cooperative learning, looking at creative group work together, and then discussion, and then extending those conversations a little bit more. So let's start off today by talking about why do we work in groups. So one of our digital coaches actually created this as an outline for you guys to take and utilize with your students if you would prefer. It is a great option for sharing out to students why it is important that we work in groups. So as you can see, I'm not going to read every detail on here, but group work in schools prepares students for the challenges that they'll face after graduation. Group work builds on the skills below the 1 through 7 to equip them with their everyday challenges. So when we're thinking about what we do on a daily basis, even as educators, sometimes we think about that as a singular job option, meaning that we don't necessarily collaborate all day long. We're with our kids most of the time. So we're doing a lot of the collaboration with little minis. But when we're really thinking about it, what we do in our daily jobs and even outside of our jobs, we are working with other individuals. So when we present it that way to students and allow them to realize that most of what they do in their life will be with others, that's really extremely important for them to start with that groundwork to build up and understand why working in groups is so important for their learning. So as you can see here, there's 7 different things that we kind of honed in on. About why we work in groups. So thinking about how feedback, creativity, social skills, teamwork, student voice, collaboration, and then thinking about modern work skills, how that will apply for them and their learning inside and outside of the classroom.
Okay, so the why behind intentional grouping. Well, we want to talk to you about this today because it's important to avoid ability grouping that may perpetuate inequalities in the classroom. We want to equalize educational opportunities, resources, and expectations to bring the low achievers up and not bring the high achievers down. In order for students to practice language functions through authentic interaction and focus on fluency and communication with different classmates, and to have a diversity of partners, contexts, and tasks, practice with cooperative and collaborative skills so all students can shine. And we're really going to focus in on cooperative and collaborative learning here in this presentation today.
So you're good. So one of the things that we really wanted to focus on because of our CRE mindset of self this session is about implicit bias, So I'm just going to read you a little outline. I'm going to pull it up real quick. That explains, it is a quote. And it states, whether bad or good, whether justified or unjustified, our beliefs and attitudes can become so strongly associated with the category that they are automatically triggered, affecting our behavior and decision making. So, for example, simply seeing a Black person can automatically bring to mind a host of associations that we have picked up from our society. This person is a good athlete. This person doesn't do well in school. This person is poor. This person dances well. This person lives in a Black neighborhood. This person should be feared. The process of making these connections is called bias. It can happen unintentionally, it can happen unconsciously, and it can happen effortlessly, as well as it can happen in a matter of milliseconds. These associations can take hold of us no matter our values, no matter our conscious beliefs, no matter what kind of person we wish to be in this world. That was by Janet L. Eberhard. And I just want you to think about that quote and think about what we see here on the screen. For those of you that have not heard the term implicit bias or are recently embarking on your equity journey, I want you to think about, how does this show up in the classroom when we're grouping students? How does your biases contribute to how kids are grouped inside of your classroom? So you are obviously welcome to share in the chat. You're welcome to share out loud. I would just like, as we're going through this process through this PL, for you to think about this in the back of your mind. And while we're talking about grouping students, think about how maybe your biases have played a part in the past, or think about how you can shift those biases to support your students now in the future.
Okay, so now is the time where we are going to start going through our presentation. Just a reminder, we're going to be talking about grouping strategies, creative group work, and discussions and discussion extension. So once you get those kids in a group, how are we going to get them to actually talk and communicate with each other? So you do have the option, as Caitlin said earlier, to work independently. However, it's more valuable if you can stick with us. If you would like to work independently, we have linked in the slide deck, which is linked in the chat right here on slide 64, resources for you to do so. And if you do decide to work independently, please return to the main room, that first one we are all in together, at 11:05.
All right, so we're going to get started talking about grouping strategies. I only see one person on the screen right now, but for those of you that have worked with Kagan structures, let me know if this is repetitive. Of course, feel free. Thank you, Kathleen. Let me know if there's something that you'd like to add into. But both Amy and I have gone through the certification of being a Kagan coach. So this is very near and dear to my heart. There is a lot about Kagan that is not going to be talked about here. So of course, if you'd like to explore this more, feel free to talk to your digital coach, or feel free to reach out to Amy or I, and we'd love to talk more about it. But we're going to touch base with just grouping strategies in general. So Kagan talks all about cooperative learning. And in what we're going to be looking at today is going to be referencing cooperative learning and looking at it as teamwork, right? So some of the things that we want to focus on while we're talking about grouping strategies is talking about sitting in teams to master and deeper thinking. So we'll talk about certain seating arrangements and options where you can group. Heterogeneous teams or groups mirror diversity in the classroom. It's obvious that sometimes we put students next to one another. There are reasonings behind that, but thinking about how heterogeneous teams allows for diversity to be more prevalent and be more accounted for inside of a classroom. And then looking at the ideal size of 4 students in a group, thinking about academically students that are high, medium, and low. So these 4 student categorized groups really are something that we're going to hone in on, but we're going to talk about why it's so essential to understanding your student as a whole student rather than just them academically. In the box right there, some of our other coaches have gathered up resources to be able to support you in grouping. So those are some digital grouping tools where you can put in student names, their ability grouping, depending on what subject you're teaching or what groups you would need them for, looking at random group generators, etc. So those are great resources to support you as you start on this journey. So we're just going to brief over some of the pros and cons of these grouping options. So a lot of what cooperative learning talks about and Kagan structures is about mixed ability grouping. And so you'll notice that there are 4 team types of grouping that we have here. Some pros and cons for for all of them, excuse me. And they're actually numbered based off of what Kagan supports the most. So for example, heterogeneous groups, most of their Kagan strategies that they provide talk a lot about grouping heterogeneously. So we're going to primarily focus on that today, looking at how a heterogeneous group can keep your classroom balanced. It can allow for higher achievers to be on every team level, and it maximizes that race, sex, and ability contact with one another. The only real negative that we really found when we were looking through some of those pros and cons would be that it does require a little bit of extra prep time. You have to think ahead of grouping in a class, and then it requires ranking and labeling, which we know that right away gives those like pings of that's not appropriate. However, we do understand that when we group in homogeneous groups, we're doing that anyways. When we do data collection, data conversations, that happens just effortlessly, unfortunately. And so for us, we're doing it intentionally by ranking them so that they are supporting one another as a team and as a community within their classroom. So again, heterogeneous groups are what we're going to primarily be focusing on, but we also did want to mention random, homogeneous, and student selected groups here for you as well. So one of the coolest parts about Kagan that I found super supportive when I was in the classroom was the seating arrangements. So I've actually linked at that top picture where it says the 1, 2, 3, 4. I've linked a TPT like outline that I purchased a long time ago where you can put them on tables if you are grouping students in groups of 4. You can also readjust and place more numbers there for like bigger groups as well. But like we said on the previous slide or 2 slides ago, 4 students is pretty much the max that they would recommend. But right here, you can see some awesome options for team seating. And you'll notice when we talked about that high, medium, and low in that bottom right picture, that is what the picture that's what a grouping would look like. So students have face-to-face partners that are not on their level, side or elbow partners that are maybe not on their level, but everybody is in a collaborative team so that everybody is learning alongside one another, excuse me. So just some things to think about when we're talking about heterogeneous teams is there's peer tutoring available without them even knowing it. Increasing achievement. Remember, we're talking about not bringing high achievers down, but low achievers to that medium level. Positive interaction among students of all backgrounds, improving those race relations. So we talked about a few moments ago, thinking about how our biases have played a part in grouping. This is one of those things where we're starting to think about students as whole students. Yes, we're thinking about where they're at academically, but we're also thinking about diversity and how students can work alongside one another. So we want to practice one of these strategies with you. So if you could, let's see, will you put the link in the chat? This is a Jamboard. Now, of course, we are all virtually right now. This specific strategy is both positive in the classroom where you are able to do have students work in teams, but we are giving you an example in which we can use it electronically. So Amy has just placed in our Jamboard. The essential question we'd like you to just play with is think of as many ice cream flavors as possible and put them into the Jamboard for us. And we understand that seems a little silly, but we're going to talk about how collaborative work is exhibited here. Let me open it up myself. Yes. Just add a sticky note, add a text, whatever works for you. We'll just take a few moments to kind of see how this works, and you can start now.
Mine is in a view only.
Oh. Let's see. Is everybody else's a view only too? Yeah, okay. So yeah, let's change that. Amy says she's sorry.
Sorry.
All right, if you reload, let us know if it doesn't work.
Is it working?
Okay, Kathy says yes. All right, so just add in as many as you can think of in 2 minutes. Oh, sorry, I was moving yours. All right, I'll give you 30 more seconds to think of as many ice cream flavors as you can. No, that sounds right. Amy wants to know, is vanilla and chocolate and strawberry, is that called Napoleon? Anybody know? Yes, Jill says.
Because that's something from my childhood. I remember.
Yeah. All right. Will you share that Jot thought just on the screen?
I will.
All right, we're going to pop out of our presentation and just look at that Jot thought just for a second. So as you can see here, this was just a quick activity. Again, it can be virtual, it can be in person. Think of these as real sticky notes, right? So you present a topic to your class and you ask them in a group to collaboratively think about all of the types of ice creams that are possible. This is a great community builder too. So one of the things that you can do is do it on a Jamboard. You can do it on Padlet if you have upper elementary, or have a stack of sticky notes. The coolest part, this is called, if I didn't mention this before, sorry, this is called Jot Thoughts. This is an explicit example through Kagan where students are collaborating independently. They have brainstorming time, think time, but they are also participating as a group to collaboratively bring up as many flavors as they possibly can. So even though, one of the steps in Jot Thoughts explicitly is where they are saying it out loud. So for example, I write down mint chocolate chip. I say mint chocolate chip out loud. I stack it into the middle of the desk so that kids know that I've already placed that one. That's part of our group. We don't need to add another mint chocolate chip, right? So just like on Jamboard where you can see other people's responses and you can say, oops, somebody already put turtle, so I'm not going to put that myself, right? So it's a think about for themselves, but it's also a collaborative experience for students to create answers as a group and independently. So if you go back to our slide, so there is one of the academic examples. This was just for us for fun today, but one of the things that we were thinking about was like, if you're trying to think about all the ways that, like, think about in a math class, think about all the ways that you can express the number 17, right? You can think about addition, subtraction. You can think about drawings. You can have them do tally marks. You can have them just think outside of their box and think about different ways that they can express themselves. But as a group, we'll be able to explain their reasoning to each other so that as a group, they are figuring out all of these various ways to create 17. So again, Jot Thoughts is a group engagement strategy through Kagan where we think about as a group, we have a guiding question, they've got sticky notes or a virtual component, and students have that think time to brainstorm while also collaborating on ideas as a whole group.
Okay, and then just to talk a little bit more about group work and expectations, it could be really helpful to have a rubric and actually go over, discuss this rubric with students before they are put into any sort of group work so they know the expectations and then they can actually use the rubric in an authentic way. So we have one linked on the left, which is really good for primary grades and photos, and then we have this one, they're both linked, correct? Mm-hmm. Linked on the right, that could be better for the higher grades. And this can just help to get feedback about the groups and for the group members to provide teacher and peers feedback as well. So one more thing to think about when grouping and really trying to get the most out of your groups is to listen to the students and what they have to say and how they're feeling about the group work.
Hold on before you change. One of the things that another educator brought up in our last group was about sometimes feeling insecure about having students go off and work in collaborative groups and not being able to be there, or if you're working in a small group separately, making sure that students are holding themselves accountable. This is a great way for students to be able to collaboratively come together, determine where they fall on that feedback rubric. Either one works for elementary. And then as a group, you can come back and have a whole conversation about how did your group mates do? Let's think about how you were successful during this time. Go ahead, Kathleen. Can't hear you. Can you guys hear her? Well, I would love to hear your question. On the bottom, Kathleen, if you go to your speaker, let's see. All right. Let's see. If you go down to it's okay. We have more than enough time. If you go down to the 3 dots and go to your settings, and then just change your microphone to make sure that it matches with your computer. No, can't hear you. Do you want to put your question in the chat maybe? I'm sorry. That's unfortunate. We'd love to hear from you. While Kathleen's writing it out, just something to think about as another form so that you feel a little bit more secure about having sending students off to work collaboratively. This just allows for another accountability piece. That is really strange, Kathleen. I'm sorry. So far, while Kathleen's writing out her question for us, does anybody have any questions about what we've gone over so far? Again, this is only a minimal amount of information, of course, but you are more than welcome to chat with us in just a few when we give you some independent time about some of the Kagan things that we weren't able to go over, or some more about these creative group works. We do have one more section, and we'll come back, Kathleen, to your question. Amy, if you want to continue on, and then we'll come back and answer. Go ahead.
Okay, so just coming back to this idea of implicit bias and the unconscious associations that we make maybe around our students, and not necessarily intentionally, but it just happens. And so it's just important to be thinking of them, be mindful of them, and really taking this time to think about, oh, when have I done this in the past? Maybe when it comes to grouping, grouped kids in a certain way. I know when I was teaching once, I was grouping all of my students who were native Spanish speakers together because I didn't want them to feel uncomfortable having to use their language skills, because I knew they wouldn't speak, because I didn't have systems put in place for them to feel comfortable speaking in a group with native English speakers. And so I was grouping them together, not really knowing that I was kind of having an implicit bias of these students won't feel comfortable in this group and they won't be able to communicate in the way I'd like them to. So even though it doesn't feel good to say it, it is something that I did when I was first a teacher. And so it's just a time to reflect on your own practice and think about maybe when have you done it and what could you do to change that and be more intentional around biases and grouping students moving forward.
And something to think about here, like our underlying question that we're at right now is, how does it show up when you're facilitating discussion, right? So I want us to think about when you are calling on students, when you are having kids turn and talk, when you're thinking about the students that you constantly call on, right? It's all there. We all know that these things are around and that we experience them and that we perpetuate them. And so the biggest thing that we're asking you to do is step back for a moment and question, how can I change that? How can I make sure that my students are getting the greatest access to their education without my biases playing a part, right? So as we're thinking about an extending conversation, in just a moment we're going to go through that, think about how implicit bias is showing up when you're facilitating those discussions and those groupings with your students.
And with that in mind, we are going to be talking a little bit more about discussions and extending talks. So now you have some ideas of how to group your kids, what to do when they're in the group, like that Jot Thought activity, or there's a ton of other, I don't even know how many
Hundreds,
Hagen
yeah.
cooperative learning structures that you can reach out to us if you'd like to learn more than just Jot Thoughts. That was just one we thought we could do together. But now they're in the group, and how are we going to get the students talking? Because the person doing the talking is the person who is doing the learning. So we really want the students to be doing the majority of the talking in the classroom, especially what in groups. And students need these opportunities to verbalize what they are taking in to build social skills. And this is going to help them in all aspects of their life. And it's going to allow everybody to be engaged rather than just one student at a time. So one way is when they're in their group, you can have sort of like sentence stems, or these are just ways to help extend their thinking. And this can be something every student has. Maybe it's laminated and it's on their desk, or it's on your group tables. So they already can be thinking about how they're going to contribute to a conversation. And it could be you're focusing on one for the day, or students can choose. But whenever they're speaking, maybe they're selecting one of these sentence stems to continue the conversation further, instead of saying things like, yes, I like that. And then it's like, but why? Would you like to add to that?
Yeah. So one of the things, and we will watch this video, it's just a short video, to see how students are encouraged to continue academic conversation. So Kathleen, I am noticing all of your statements, and I want to loop it back around after we watch the video, thinking about how not only the pandemic has affected students and their communication skills, but also thinking about how to allow space for students to feel comfortable having those conversations without us having to guide it, right? That's always been the piece of hand holding. How far can we get with students when they're just working independently, right? How do we ensure that they are continuing that learning? So okay.
These are the keys to participate.
Were you able to hear it? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Participating in a conversation fully.
Sometimes we all need a little bit of a Kickstarter to feel like we can contribute. Children are going to struggle a bit, depending on how confident they feel in speaking up in class. And yet this teacher wants everybody in the class to feel valued. So the kids are all learning phrases that can inspire other kids to contribute more easily.
We're trying to build a conversation here that is a community of caring and respect. So look at your talk moves on the table today, and I have a Post-it note here for you.
Talk moves are essentially sentence starters that students can use to get themselves into the conversation and to draw other people into the conversation.
By the government, and they just can't figure out what to do.
I taped the talk moves right on the table so that they would be ever present in everyone's mind.
Today, I want you to keep track of your talk moves.
Every time they used a talk move, they put a check on their sticky note.
So if somebody at your table looks like they don't have a talk move check mark yet, invite them into the conversation. How could you do that?
Say what do you think?
Definitely. Would you use their name?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Everything about activating a child's cognitive skills begins with activating their social connectedness. Verbalizing and using language and working with peers creates that kind of social stimulus that drives the development of the brain.
I pretty much look at the thing every single time to see if there's something I could say, a clarifying question. Can you explain more about why he would get in trouble?
He spray painted something on his rival soccer team's school, and when you ask a person a clarifying question, it's either, oh, I heard you said, or can you repeat what you said, or to add on to.
They help enormously with language learners. They give everybody a platform to jump into a conversation because half the sentence is there for them already. But they also challenge other types of learners who may be accustomed to doing independent work and they need a bridge to collaborate more with a group. It pushes kids out of their comfort zone of social conversations, and it moves them more towards a professional and an academic kind of register.
All his accomplishments in his past, like all the other marches he had, like Martin Luther King, his other previous marches, and he wants to help his next march.
I heard you say previous marches. Like, does it say anything about like?
Yeah, like he was in Martin Luther King marches.
I do talk moves because in order to have a great discussion, everyone has to feel like they're part of it and valued. And when they walk away, they really have bridged a gap with someone that maybe they wouldn't have necessarily talked to or talked to on that level.
This teacher is aware of children having different levels of comfort and discomfort, of making their skills visible, and she's getting kids to support each other's participation with these talk moves. This teacher created a pathway for every single child in this class to belong.
So just as Amy mentioned, talk moves are a great chance for students to feel successful in communicating with one another. One of the things that Kathleen mentioned was talking a little bit about how students have struggled in groups and working collaboratively has been a big issue. But thinking about like refusing to participate or not feeling like they're able to participate or communicate effectively. Those are all huge things that we face every single day, right? The pandemic has done many things to our students and made them feel even more insecure than they were before, right? So thinking about utilizing such examples to extend discussion, such as these talk moves, and having those be prevalent or present on their desks at all times. Of course, that was a great strategy that the teacher used where they knew exactly what they were supposed to do. They needed to make sure that they incorporated several talk moves every single day during every discussion. That's great, but sometimes that's unrealistic for some of us, right? So thinking about if you have, especially if you have like youngers, meaning like K2, thinking about how these talk moves, if it's a struggle for them to read, how you can incorporate that utilizing pictures, right? Like talking about how you can, if you are a Seesaw user or a Flipgrid user, thinking about how students can incorporate these sentence stems on a regular basis, right? So these are just ways that we can get kids continuing to talk rather than thinking about, oh, I liked your story, and that's as far as they go, right? We want them to help each other by giving them feedback, but we also want to extend their learning by supporting them with these sentence stems if they're feeling like they're struggling to come up with an idea or a question or a statement to continue the conversation.
These are the keys to participate.
Let's see if we can get to
Always
the next
happens.
slide. Okay, so we want to leave you with some resources when we're thinking about elaboration. And so what barriers to student participation do you experience in your class? Now, I know that Kathleen was already saying after the pandemic, kids just really don't want to talk. So these are linked right here. It's important to always set clear expectations, having maybe that rubric of like what is expected and why, and giving students the autonomy to take care of or to show up how they want to, but know that there's a rubric and know kind of what the expectations are. And then you see we have the elaboration strategies linked here. So this is just further resources for you. Also rubrics and discussion activities. So we are going to give you some time here in a second to look through these resources, and then we'll be here to support you if you want to discuss any of them further. And then also, since we are the tech team, how can different tech tools help students find their voice? So giving students think time to write down their thoughts first, and then have them sharing in some sort of platform like a Padlet or a Jamboard that we just did. And this can be in a group, so they're actually verbalizing, sharing orally as they're doing something on a tech tool as well. Another option would be digital discussion boards. So this can happen in Seesaw and in Flipgrid. So students can really verbalize, and then they can respond to each other orally. And this can help with just using oral language. And then you can also have them using sentence stems or elaboration strategies when they're responding to videos and things of that nature.
Yeah, I think you got it. I honestly think that the biggest piece for us is finding ways to work around our barriers, right? So technology, as much as some struggle to incorporate it into the classroom for various reasons. Technology is an extremely accessible tool for students that also don't feel the most comfortable in discussing out loud. One of the things that I had mentioned previously about biases is thinking about how you call on students and what students are usually the ones that raise their hand or that participate the most. And so thinking about it this way, if you are using a tech tool like Seesaw or Flipgrid, honestly, Padlet or Jamboard, they are there, they are still being held accountable, but students may not feel as insecure about talking out loud. So these are just things to think about to get students talking more and collaborating more amongst their team members and their classmates. So again, like Amy said, you've got about 30 minutes to kind of independently look through some of these resources. Of course, if you have more questions on any of the strategies or things that we brought up during our session, feel free to please let us know. But this is your time to think about maybe grouping strategies, think about some ways to extend discussion, think about, I know that we're in a funny period right now where we have testing going on and lots of things are happening, but think about future you, what you would like to do at the end of the school year. Think about ways that you can extend discussion, even if it's a silly activity like give us your ice cream flavors or whatever. So let us know how we can support you. Amy and I are here. We are going to stop the recording. And if you have any questions, we're here to help. But otherwise, the expectation is we would love for you to come back to our original link. And I'll put that in the chat in just a moment to have a whole group just kind of reflection. And then we'll be done for the day.